Her daughter-in-law called her bad for the aesthetic and asked her own son to keep her upstairs. Margaret didn't argue. She smiled, poured the tea and said nothing. By sunrise, every lock in the house would be changed. By week's end, the deed would bear only her name. She'd spent decades as their safety net. Now she was pulling it away. And when they came downstairs looking for her, the keys wouldn't fit. We're just getting started. But before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? These stories aren't just mine, they're mirrors. Drop your city in the comments, and if you believe in second chances, hit subscribe. She said it so casually, she's just bad for the aesthetic. The words dropped into the air like an offhand joke, but they didn't land that way in Lillian's chest. She stood at the stove, steam curling from the saucepan, her hand hovering over the ladle as though it could shield her from the sting. The kitchen smelled of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and the sweet tang of cranberries. Thanksgiving had always been her favorite, partly because it was the one holiday she could count on Beatrice to come home for. From where she stood, she could see the entryway. Beatrice was still in her coat, smiling for the cluster of friends who had come along. "Everyone, this is Lillian. She's just the babysitter we let stay here." The room laughed lightly, the kind of polite chuckle people give when they aren't sure what else to do. "Babysitter, let's stay here." The words scraped across Lillian's mind, each one stripping a little more paint off the memories she'd built. Memories of raising Beatrice through scraped knees, sleepless nights, and college tuition she could barely afford. She turned the burner down, forcing her lips into something that looked like a smile as the children barreled into the kitchen. "Grandma," they shouted, throwing their arms around her waist. The warmth of them cut the cold in her chest, if only for a second. In the living room, Beatrice had already moved on, pouring wine and chatting with William. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded in contentment, adding the occasional quip to keep the conversation flowing. Not once did his gaze meet hers. Not once did he correct what Beatrice had said. The table was already set, the candles lit. Lillian carried out the mashed potatoes, the silver spoon trembling slightly against the bowl. She passed by Beatrice, who didn't even pause her story about the new look they were giving the house. "We're going for something cleaner," she said to a friend. "Less clutter, more aesthetic." That word again, as if everything in this house existed to serve a theme. She slid the potatoes into place and took her seat at the far end of the table. Conversation swirled around her, skipping over her like a stone over water. She smiled when appropriate, laughed when expected. Inside, she felt the slow turn of a lock, the click of something sealing shut. When the meal was over, she gathered the plates without being asked, stacking them with practiced care. The dishwasher hummed to life. The guests moved back into the living room, their voices fading into the distance. Alone, Lillian dried her hands on a dish towel and let herself lean against the counter. The light above the sink hummed faintly, casting a soft yellow over the kitchen. She thought of all the Thanksgivings before, of Beatrice as a little girl, sitting cross-legged on the counter, helping stir the gravy of the year. Lillian had sold her own car so Beatrice could pay her rent, of the promises she had believed meant something. She looked toward the hallway that led to her small upstairs room, the guest space as Beatrice called it now. She thought about the way her daughter had said those words, the way William had looked right through her, and something in her chest hardened. Enough, she thought. She pulled open a side drawer to grab a notepad. Her fingers brushed against something unexpected, thick paper, neatly stacked. She pulled the top edge into the light and saw the embossed lettering, Family Trust, Property and Asset Agreements. She froze, her heartbeat quickening. Her thumb rested on the folder's tab as a thought took root. Maybe this wasn't just paper. Maybe this was her way out. I had always sacrificed for Beatrice, but that moment made me realize something. I was no longer needed. Lillian stayed in the kitchen longer than she had to, letting the steady rhythm of rinsing plates cover the quiet tremor in her hands. The clink of porcelain against the sink was almost soothing, until a burst of laughter from the living room carried through, sharp and uninvited. She didn't need to hear every word to know she was the punchline. It was in the tone, Beatrice's easy confidence, William's low rumble of agreement, the way their friends' laughter didn't quite fade fast enough. The faucet hissed as she turned it off. For a moment she simply stood there, palms braced on the counter, staring at the trail of water droplets leading to the drain. She thought of every time she had put her daughter first, the after-school rides, when she was bone-tired from work, the weekend sacrifice to help her move apartments, the years she'd quietly paid bills without asking for repayment. She had told herself it was what mothers did, that it wasn't a sacrifice if it was for family. But tonight, as she listened to them out there, it sounded less like family and more like a room full of people perfectly fine without her. A snatch of conversation rose above the hum of voice. "We're just stretched so thin right now," Beatrice was saying. "Mortgage, renovations, the car needing work. It's like we can't catch a break." Lillian's jaw tightened. She'd heard this tune before, always on the heels of some subtle request. In her mind she saw the bank statements she never should have peeked at, the credit card charges that didn't add up, the expensive furniture that arrived just days after Beatrice claimed she was broke. She pressed a towel to her damp hands, eyes flicking toward the drawer she'd opened earlier. The memory of those embossed words, family trust, still prickled at the edges of her mind. For years she had told herself it was safer to keep things as they were, to let Beatrice and William live here, to believe they would take care of her when she needed them. Now the certainty she had clung to felt like a thread snapping. The sound of glasses clinking drew her back. William's voice drifted in. "She means well," he said, followed by another ripple of laughter, light, but just sharp enough to make her skin prickle. Invisible, that's what she'd become. She crossed to the counter and picked up her phone. The screen glowed in the dim light, reflecting in her eyes. Her thumb hovered over her contacts before finding Rachel's name. Reliable, sharp Rachel, her oldest friend and the only one she trusted with the truth. Her fingers moved before she could second-guess herself. "We need to talk tomorrow. I'm ready to make some changes." She stared at the message, feeling her pulse in her throat. It wasn't anger propelling her now, it was clarity, the kind that came when there was nothing left to lose. From the living room, Beatrice's voice carried again, lighter now. "I mean, it's not like she has anything else going on, she likes being here." Lillian's thumb pressed the phone's side button, cutting the glow. She didn't want to hear any more, didn't want their voices coloring the resolve hardening inside her. The dishwasher beeped its completion. She moved on instinct, stacking clean plates into the cabinet, sliding silverware into drawers. It was muscle memory serving, tidying, making things easier for everyone but herself. She paused, fingers resting on the smooth rim of a dinner plate, and wondered how many more nights she'd spend doing this for people who saw her as little more than background. The phone buzzed against the counter, sharp enough to make her flinch. She picked it up. Rachel's reply was short, but it vibrated with urgency. "I'll be at your place tomorrow, ready to discuss everything. If they think they can take everything from me, they've got another thing coming." The next morning, Lillian was at the small kitchen table before dawn, a mug of coffee cooling between her hands. Outside, the November air pressed frost against the windows, dimming the early light into something gray and flat. She hadn't slept much. Her mind kept circling the same thought, the same folder she'd touched the night before. By the time Rachel knocked, the house was still quiet upstairs. Beatrice and William were either asleep or avoiding her. Lillian preferred not to guess. Rachel stepped inside, brushing the cold from her coat. "You look like you've been up all night," she said gently. "I have," Lillian admitted, motioning her toward the table. The folder was already there, its weight almost physical in the center of the room. Rachel flipped it open, scanning the top page with practiced eyes. "This is the trust agreement your late husband set up." She turned a few pages, tapping her nail against a section halfway down. "You're still the primary trustee, which means," she looked up, meeting Lillian's gaze. "This house is yours, Lillian. Full control. They're here because you allow it." Something deep in Lillian's chest loosened, part relief, part fury. She had lived for years as though she were the guest, tiptoeing around renovations and paint swatches, enduring corrections about aesthetic. But in black and white, here was proof. This was her home. She sat back, letting the thought expand. "And if I wanted to take her out of it?" Rachel hesitated. "You can, but it's not a small step. This would mean removing her from any future claim. She'd have to stand on her own." Lillian thought of the laughter last night, The offhand cruelty of that introduction. The years of quiet withdrawals from her savings to cover Beatrice's emergencies. She thought of the look on William's face. Smug, certain she would never challenge them. Maybe it's time, she said. Rachel leaned in, lowering her voice. I need to ask, are you sure? This will cause damage you can't undo. For a moment Lillian pictured a version of herself backing down, choosing peace over confrontation. That woman felt far away now, like someone she used to know but couldn't quite name. I've had enough, she said, each word deliberate. And so has he. Rachel studied her for a beat, then nodded. She pulled a pen from her bag, laying the documents out in neat order. The paper felt smooth beneath Lillian's fingertips as she signed. The pen's scratch against the page sounded louder than it should have in the quiet kitchen. When it was done, Rachel gathered the papers, tucking them into a manila envelope. It's official, she said. The trust is yours alone now. If they want to live here, it's on your terms. Lillian leaned back in her chair, an unfamiliar lightness in her shoulders. She realized she hadn't felt this in years. Control, not over Beatrice but over herself. She could breathe again. Rachel reached across the table, resting her hand over Lillian's. You've taken a big step. Lillian gave a small wry smile. It was past time. After Rachel left, the house seemed sharper somehow. Every creak and echo more distinct. Lillian stood in the hallway looking up the staircase. For once she didn't feel like she was trespassing in her own home. The rest of the morning passed quietly. She washed the coffee cups, read the paper, folded the blanket on the sofa. Small acts that felt different now, rooted in ownership rather than obligation. In the afternoon she settled into the armchair by the front window, the pale winter sun warming the side of her face. She was just beginning to close her eyes when her phone buzzed on the end table. A voicemail notification lit up the screen. The preview text was short, but her daughter's name in bold letters made her chest tighten. Beatrice's voice, tinny through the speaker, said only, "We need to in person." Then the message ended. He thought I'd back down. But this time I wasn't backing down. The driveway was slick with frost when Lillian pulled in. She sat in the car for a moment, watching her breath cloud the air. Beatrice's house looked almost smug in the pale winter light. Trim painted a fashionable slate blue, wreath perfectly centered on the front door. Lillian had paid for most of it without ever setting foot inside until now. She rang the bell and waited. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. When the door opened, Beatrice's smile was nowhere to be found. Her eyes darted over Lillian's face, searching for a crack in her resolve. "Mom," she said, holding the door just wide enough. "Come in." The heat inside hit Lillian immediately, scented faintly with cinnamon candle. Beatrice led her through the foyer to the kitchen, where 2 coffee mugs sat untouched on the counter. The quiet between them was brittle. Beatrice turned, arms crossed. "Why are you being so difficult?" Lillian didn't bother with small talk. "I've made some changes to the family trust. You're no longer part of it." The words seemed to hang in the air before Beatrice let out a short, incredulous laugh. "What do you mean? This is our family, Mom. You can't just cut me off like that." "I can," Lillian said evenly, "and I have. You've taken from me for years, Beatrice. It ends now. It's time for you to face the consequences." A flush crept up her daughter's neck. "You think you're teaching me a lesson? You're destroying the family. For what? Because you didn't like a joke?" "It wasn't a joke," Lillian said, her voice low but unshaken. "It was a reminder of exactly where I stand in your life. And I'm no longer standing there." Beatrice's jaw worked as if she were chewing over her next words. "You do realize this works both ways. If you want to play hardball, fine, I can have you out of that house in a week." Lillian felt the corner of her mouth lift. Not in amusement, but in the satisfaction of knowing she had anticipated this. "You might want to check your paperwork before making threats. The house is already in my name. Fully. Permanent." For a moment, Beatrice's expression faltered, the certainty in her eyes replaced by something darker. She stepped back, the heel of her boot clicking against the tile. "You've been planning this," she said almost to herself. "I've been surviving this," Lillian corrected. "There's a difference." Beatrice's voice sharpened. "You've made a huge mistake. You think you're protecting yourself, but all you're doing is pushing everyone away. Don't come running to me when you're alone. Lillian held her daughter's gaze. If the choice is between being alone or being used, I'll take alone. The words seemed to land harder than she'd intended. Beatrice's eyes narrowed, the muscle in her jaw tightening again. You'll regret this, she said finally. Lillian didn't answer. She simply stepped back from the counter, letting the silence expand between them until it felt like a wall neither could cross. For a heartbeat, Beatrice looked as though she might say something more, but then her face hardened. She grabbed her phone from the counter, shoved it into her pocket, and strode toward the hallway. The slam of the front door echoed through the house as Beatrice stormed out, her fury hanging in the air long after she was gone. I knew I had crossed a line, but for once I didn't care. The sound of the door slamming still echoed in Lillian's ears when she heard another set of footsteps in the hallway. Lighter, slower. Claire appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair pulled back neatly, a mug cradled in her hand. She didn't speak right away, just leaned against the frame, and studied Lillian. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a measured, disapproving calm. You really did it, Claire said finally. Lillian met her gaze without flinching. I did. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't argue, didn't plead, just stood there, her silence saying more than words ever could. Then she turned and walked away, the soft pad of her footsteps fading into the rest of the house. The quiet that followed was thick, but not uncomfortable. For the first time in years, Lillian felt like she could breathe in her own skin. There was tension, yes, but underneath it was something else, a lightness, almost a thrill. She'd crossed a line she could never uncross, and instead of fear, she felt free. She gathered her coat from the back of a chair, slipping it over her shoulders as she headed for the door. Outside, the cold bit at her cheeks, but she didn't mind. The frost glittered on the car windshield like a thin sheet of diamond. By the time she was halfway down the drive, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The name flashing on the screen stopped her in her tracks. Beatrice, she debated letting it go to voicemail but answered anyway. Her daughter's voice was smaller now, urgent in a way Lillian hadn't heard in years. Mom, can we just talk about this? Please. You don't have to do this. Lillian leaned against the side of the car, letting the cold metal seep through her coat. Beatrice, she said evenly, you had your chance. Now you'll learn to stand on your own. There was a beat of silence on the other end, followed by a sharp inhale. You're making a mistake. I've made plenty. Lillian cut in, her tone final. This isn't one of them. She ended the call before Beatrice could respond. The air felt sharper now, the edges of her resolve glinting in the winter sun. Driving back home, she kept one hand loosely on the wheel, the other resting in her lap. Her mind was quiet, not blank, but focused, like she'd finally cleared away the clutter that had been weighing her down. She parked, let herself into the house, and hung her coat on the hook by the door. The familiar scent of coffee and old wood wrapped around her like a reminder that this place was her. Out of habit, she picked up her phone again, scrolling through notifications. That's when she saw it, a small red dot over her banking app. She tapped it open. Alert. Mortgage payment missed. $2,450 due immediately. Lillian's brow furrowed. The account listed wasn't hers. It was the joint account Beatrice had been using for the house expenses, which meant she sat down at the kitchen table, the phone warm in her hand. If Beatrice had missed this payment, it wasn't just an oversight. It was leverage. Her eyes stayed on the screen, reading the words again and again. The possibilities unfolded in her mind, slow and deliberate, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. A slow smile spread across her face. She had more power than she'd realized. Now the only question was how to use it. If she thinks she can take from me, then she'll learn just how much I've given. The numbers on the bank app burned into Lillian's vision long after she closed it. The missed payment wasn't a one-off mistake. Her gut told her that years of quiet observation had sharpened her instincts, and they rarely failed her. She reached for the phone again, this time scrolling to the number for the bank. Her fingers were steady as she tapped the call button, but her pulse thudded in her ears. First Union Mortgage Services. This is Carla. How can I help you today? This is Lillian Wright, she said, keeping her tone polite but clipped. I'm calling about the property on Sycamore Lane. I need to know the status of its mortgage payments. There was the faint click of a keyboard on the other end. One moment. Right, Mrs. Wright. It looks like the last 3 payments have been missed, and the account is in pre-foreclosure status. Lillian sat back, her free hand gripping the edge of the table. 3 months. Yes, ma'am. Notices have been sent to the primary account holder. That would be my daughter, Lillian said, each word precise, and I am the owner of record. Carla hesitated, then her voice softened. If you're the owner, you may want to address this as soon as possible. Another missed payment, and the file moves forward to legal proceedings. I'll handle it, Lillian replied, already reaching for a pen. Thank you. When she ended the call, the kitchen felt colder somehow, as if the truth had drawn the warmth out of the air. She thought about the renovations Beatrice bragged about, the designer coats in her closet, the nights out she posted online, and all the while she'd been letting the foundation of her life literally crumble. Betrayal wasn't a sharp knife. It was a slow acid, eating away at the parts of you that once trusted. She pulled a stack of stationery from the desk drawer, the kind she used for formal matters, and began to write. The words came easily, each one deliberate. This notice serves as formal intent to reclaim full control of the property at 214 Sycamore Lane, if all delinquent mortgage payments are not satisfied in full within 30 days. She signed it with a flourish, sealing the envelope before she could second-guess herself. The phone rang before she could even set the pen down. Beatrice's name lit up the screen again. Lillian stared at it for a moment, then answered. What the hell is going on? Her daughter demanded. I just got an email from the bank about your inquiry. Lillian didn't raise her voice. I wanted to confirm what I already suspected. You've been living here on my property without paying the mortgage for months. That's not what's happening. Don't lie to me, Lillian cut in. You've had enough of my generosity. Now you'll face the consequences. You're making this into a bigger deal than it is, Beatrice snapped. We've been juggling a lot, while buying new furniture, while taking vacations. Lillian asked. The calm in her tone was worse than shouting. No more. The line went quiet, save for the faint sound of her daughter's breath. When Beatrice spoke again, her voice was tight. You're going to destroy this family over money. This isn't about money, Lillian said. It's about respect. And I won't keep giving what you refuse to value. She ended the call before Beatrice could answer. The afternoon passed in silence, broken only by the rustle of papers as Lillian filed away documents. She knew the storm would come, phone calls, messages, maybe even unannounced visits, but the thought didn't shake her. Every step she took now was on solid ground. By early evening her phone chimed with a new message. The preview flashed across the screen in bold letters. You'll regret this, Mom. She wanted answers, but I had none to give her. The phone rang before sunrise, its sharp vibration cutting through the stillness of the kitchen. Lillian stood at the counter, watching the coffee drip into the pot, each dark stream curling like ink in water. She didn't move to answer. Let it ring once, twice, a third time. On the fourth she picked it up. Beatrice. Her daughter's voice came out tight, almost trembling, but not with fear. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to wreck my life? Lillian reached for her favorite mug, one with a faded print of a lighthouse, and let the steam rise against her face before answering. I'm not wrecking anything. You've been ignoring your responsibilities for months, years if we're being honest. That's not true. It is, she said, her voice calm but unyielding. Mortgage payments, bills, repairs, all the things you let slide while buying what you don't need. She kept her tone even, knowing that quiet truth could sting more than shouting. There was a pause on the line, and then Beatrice's voice dropped low, as if she were trying to wound in return. You're doing this to punish me. I'm not destroying you, Lillian replied, lifting the mug to her lips. The coffee was hot and bitter, steadying her. I'm teaching you to stand on your own. That's rich, Beatrice snapped. You've been there every step of my life, whether I wanted you there or not. And now you just pull the rug out. You've mistaken help for dependence, Lillian said, leaning against the counter. This isn't about punishment. It's about you growing up. Something you should have done a long time ago. For a few moments all Lillian heard was her daughter's breathing, sharp, shallow. Then the words came clipped and cold. Fine, if that's how you want it, we're done. Don't call me. Don't show up. As far as I'm concerned, we're finished. The line went dead. Lillian lowered the phone slowly, setting it face down on the counter. The house felt even quieter than before. No footsteps, no muffled conversation, just the clock ticking on the wall and the faint pop of the baseboard heater kicking in. She expected a hollow feeling to creep in, the ache of something ending. Instead, there was an odd stillness in her chest, like a lake surface after a storm, when the waves have finally settled. She carried her coffee to the table and sat down, fingers tracing the familiar scratches in the wood. Every mark told a story: holiday meals, arguments, long nights of unpaid bills. And here she was, finally free of the illusion that things could go back to the way they were. She thought about the last 24 hours, Beatrice's disbelief, the threats, Claire's silent judgment. All of it had been inevitable. People who build their lives on your back never thank you for stepping out from under them. Her gaze drifted to the folder, still sitting in the center of the table, the manila edges curling slightly from where she'd handled it the day before. The trust documents had already changed the game, but something told her the game wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The phone buzzed again. The sound was abrupt in the stillness, and for a heartbeat she considered ignoring it. Then she reached over and turned it face up. It wasn't Beatrice this time. Rachel's name glowed on the screen above a single message. "I think I found something in the family trust documents that changes everything. The truth was never what I expected it to be." The phone rang before Lillian could type a reply. Rachel's name glowed on the screen, her message still open in the background. She answered on the first ring. "What is it?" Rachel didn't waste time. "I've been combing through the trust documents again, every line, every clause. There's something you need to hear and you're not going to like it." Lillian set her coffee down, the ceramic clinking against the table. "Go on. You remember the section we discussed about distributions? Well, there's an amendment, buried in the back, small print, notarized about 5 years ago. It says that if you provide Beatrice with consistent financial support, directly or indirectly, she's entitled to claim an equivalent share of your liquid assets at the time of your passing." Lillian frowned. "That can't be right. That wasn't in the original agreement." "It wasn't," Rachel confirmed, "which means someone added it later, someone who knew you wouldn't notice." The words landed like stones in her stomach. For years she'd told herself her generosity was hers to give or withhold. Now she saw it for what it was. Every bill she'd paid, every temporary loan she'd forgiven, every grocery run that mysteriously ended up on her card had been feeding this clause. "She's been keeping me on the hook," Lillian murmured, her voice low. Rachel hesitated. "Lillian, this isn't just carelessness on her part. This reads like planning, deliberate." The kitchen seemed smaller suddenly, the air heavier. Lillian's mind rifled through the last few years, moments that now wore a different shape, the way Beatrice always asked for help, rather than solutions, the subtle guilt woven into every request. She'd thought it was dependency, now she realized it was something closer to control. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table. "And if I stop supporting her now, then the clause can't be enforced. But you'll need to formally document that change. And if you want it removed entirely, we'd have to challenge it in court." Lillian pushed back her chair, pacing the narrow length of the kitchen. "Do it. Whatever it takes." "Are you sure?" Rachel asked. "This won't just strain the relationship, it'll break it." "It's already broken," Lillian said. "Now I'm just cutting the rope she's been using to drag me under." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said, "There's something else." Lillian stopped pacing. "What now?" "When I was reviewing the financial addendums, I found references to another account. Not tied to you, not tied to William. It's in Beatrice's name only, but the deposits," she exhaled sharply, "they're substantial, consents, and the source is listed as a private estate." Lillian's chest tightened. "What estate?" Rachel's voice softened, as if preparing her for impact. "Her grandmother's, on her father's side. She's been receiving a quarterly inheritance for at least 6 years. Enough to cover her mortgage, her renovations, and then some." The betrayal settled like a weight in Lillian's bones. While she'd been stretching her own savings, sacrificing her security, Beatrice had been sitting on a hidden income. And still she'd let Lillian pay, let her believe she was keeping the family afloat. Lillian felt the heat rise in her face, not from shame this time, but from a clean, searing anger. "This game ends now," she said. Then let's start the process, Rachel replied. I'll draft the paperwork tonight. After the call ended, Lillian went to her desk. She pulled a fresh sheet of stationery and wrote in her own hand, clear, deliberate script that left no room for misinterpretation. Beatrice, the terms have changed. I know everything. I will no longer be funding your expenses. Any pending payments are canceled. This game ends now. Mom. She slid the letter into an envelope, sealing it with the same finality she felt in her chest. It wasn't just a message, it was a severing. As she reached for the address book, the thought burned through her mind. Her daughter hadn't just lied about money. She'd built her whole life on a secret fortune. This wasn't just about money. It was about taking back control of my life. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish, a scent that clung to Lillian's coat as she stepped through the double glass doors. She had never imagined she'd be here for something like this. Not fighting strangers, but her own daughter. Yet as she crossed the tiled floor toward the clerk's desk, she felt more steady than she had in years. Filing the complaint took less than 15 minutes. The weight of the envelope she slid across the counter felt almost ceremonial. Every signature, every notarized page, a piece of her reclaiming what had been quietly siphoned away. The clerk stamped the documents with a solid thunk, a sound that echoed in her chest. By the time she got home, the ripples had already begun. Beatrice didn't call. She wouldn't. But Lillian recognized the tactic when she saw it. The first shot came in the form of a letter from a law office, whose name alone sounded predatory. Turner, Mason and Holt. Inside, the language was sharp and precise, demanding she cease all action against the trust clause or face full legal remedy. Rachel had warned her, she's going to hire someone who isn't afraid to draw blood. So Lillian drew her own line. For days she combed through file boxes in the spare room, pulling every receipt, bank statement and email that tied Beatrice's spending to the clause. She found bills for vacations disguised as professional retreats, invoices for furniture shipped weeks before mortgage payments were due, and half a dozen text threads where Beatrice hinted at financial strain while sitting on inheritance deposits she'd never disclosed. Rachel helped her catalog everything, labeling evidence until the dining table disappeared under neat stacks of manila folders. You're building a wall here, she told Lillian, brick by brick, and they're going to try to knock it down. 2 weeks later, Beatrice's lawyer filed a counterclaim, painting Lillian as a controlling parent using her financial position to punish an independent adult. The language was cold, stripped of the years of history between them. Reading it, Lillian almost didn't recognize herself. The emotional pressure followed quickly. Short, barbed messages from Beatrice appeared at odd hours. You're making a fool of yourself. Everyone will see what kind of mother you really are. Sometimes there was silence, which was worse, leaving her imagination to fill in the next move. She didn't answer, not once. As the court date drew closer, her nights grew shorter. She'd wake at 2 a.m., thoughts circling like restless birds. In those moments, she reminded herself that this was no longer about winning her daughter's approval. It was about drawing a boundary and keeping it intact, no matter how much it hurt. The morning of the hearing, the city was slick from overnight rain. Lillian sat beside Rachel in the wooden benches of the courtroom, her hands folded in her lap. Across the aisle, Beatrice sat with her lawyer. The two of them bent toward each other, whispering. Her daughter's face was unreadable, polished, distant, as if she'd been rehearsing this role for weeks. When the judge called them forward, the air shifted. Lillian's lawyer spoke first, laying out the evidence with a precision that left little room for doubt. Each document, each statement was slid across to the bench, like a bead on a rosary, marking the years of quiet theft. Beatrice's attorney countered with practiced ease, reframing every act of generosity as obligation, every payment as proof of a long-standing agreement. It was a careful dance, pulling at legal threads while ignoring the human one. Then, just as Lillian's lawyer was about to begin the closing argument, Beatrice's attorney stood. "Your Honor," he said, voice carrying across the room, "there is one final piece of evidence we believe to be relevant, newly obtained and directly related to Miss Wright's financial capacity and motivations in this case." Lillian felt her stomach turn as he reached into his briefcase. A thick folder landed on the table with a dull thud, its tab marked in bold red, "Confidential Personal Financial Records of Lillian Wright." Just when I thought I had control, the game shifted. The red tab glared up at Lillian like a warning flare. Her lawyer glanced at her, brows knitting, before flipping the folder open. Inside, the pages were thick with printouts, bank statements, late notices, debt summary. Even from across the table, Lillian recognized the layout of her own mortgage provider's letterhead, the columns of figures from her credit card company. Beatrice's attorney spoke with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone who knew the weight of each word. "Miss Wright has painted herself as a prudent and financially stable trustee. However, these records indicate multiple missed payments, outstanding balances on revolving credit, and deferred property taxes over the past 18 months. He looked up, letting the silence stretch. "We submit that this undermines her ability to act in the best interest of the trust." The murmurs from the gallery buzzed in Lillian's ears. She sat straighter, refusing to glance toward Beatrice, who sat motionless beside her counsel, lips pressed together in an almost smile. Her lawyer leaned close. "Some of these are out of context, but it will take work to untangle the optics." Lillian kept her voice low. "She knew about this, she's been waiting for the right moment." It clicked into place. How Beatrice had insisted on handling certain bills on Mom's behalf, offering to streamline payments, and how strangely easy it had been to miss a deadline or two when someone else was nudging the calendar. Small lapses, carefully timed, seeds planted long ago. When the judge allowed her lawyer to respond, Lillian placed a hand on his arm. "Let me speak." He hesitated but stepped back. She rose, facing both the bench and the opposing table. "Yes, I've had debts. I've had missed payment. And if we look closely, we'll see that every one of them connects to a period when my accounts were being managed by my daughter, under the guise of helping me. I didn't come here to hide my flaws. I came here to expose the pattern. Every financial misstep you see in those pages is part of a design to make me look incapable, while keeping me dependent on her cooperation." Beatrice's lawyer objected, but Lillian's voice cut through. "You'll find transfers from my accounts to hers labeled as reimbursement. You'll find property tax reminders sent to her address instead of mine. You'll find a record of control, not neglect." The courtroom quieted. Even the judge leaned forward. Across the aisle, Beatrice's gaze finally broke from its composure. Her chin lifted, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something, fear, or maybe the realization that her game had been named aloud. Lillian didn't look away. "I may have made mistakes, Your Honor, but I will not be defined by a narrative built on manipulation. My goal has never been to enrich myself. It has been to stop the slow bleeding of a life's work into someone else's entitlement." The judge called for a brief recess, his gavel striking once. 10 minutes. "We'll resume for closing argument." As the courtroom emptied into the hallway, Rachel caught Lillian's arm. "You hit her where it hurt." Lillian exhaled, feeling the heat drain from her shoulders. She's been preparing for this, but so have I. Down the hall, Beatrice stood with her lawyer, their voices low but urgent. She didn't glance over, didn't break the invisible line between them. Lillian used the time to steady herself in the quiet of an alcove, watching rain streak the courthouse windows. This wasn't over, not until the judge's words sealed one future and erased another. When the bailiff called them back in, the air was thick again, charged with unspoken tension. The judge returned to the bench, papers in hand, his expression unreadable as he said, "I have reached a decision." Victory wasn't just about the ruling, it was about reclaiming my life. The courtroom settled into an uneasy quiet as the judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the papers in his hands. Lillian's heartbeat matched the steady tick of the clock on the back wall. Beside her, Rachel's hand rested lightly on her forearm, a grounding weight. "In the matter of the family trust," the judge began, his voice even but carrying through the room, "the court finds that the contested clause cannot be enforced due to lack of informed consent by the trustee at the time of its amendment." Lillian's breath caught. Furthermore, the judge continued, we find insufficient evidence to support the claim that Mrs. Wright is incapable of managing the trust. The petition to grant Ms. Beatrice Wright partial control of the trustee's liquid assets is dismissed, with prejudice. The gavel came down sharp and final. The relief didn't crash over her like she expected. It seeped in slow and steady, a warmth spreading through limbs that had been tense for months. Across the aisle, Beatrice's posture stiffened, her lawyer already leaning in with low, urgent words. As the judge exited, the room erupted into hushed conversations. Lillian rose, smoothing her skirt, and crossed the narrow space between their tables. Beatrice looked up, her expression caught between defiance and something smaller. You don't get to take from me anymore, Lillian said quietly. There was no anger in her tone, only a clarity that made the words feel heavier. Beatrice's chin trembled just enough to be noticed. I'm sorry, she said, but it landed awkwardly, as if she were testing the weight of the word without knowing how to carry it. Lillian held her gaze for a moment longer before shaking her head. It's too late for sorry. She turned away before she could second-guess herself. Outside, the courthouse steps glistened from the morning rain, the air smelling faintly of wet stone and exhaust. Each step down felt like shedding a layer she no longer needed. At the bottom, Rachel wrapped her in a hug that was warm and unhurried. You did it, Rachel said. We did it, Lillian corrected. In the days that followed, she moved through her home like it was hers for the first time, rearranging rooms, boxing up things that belonged to no one anymore. Reclaiming corners she'd avoided, she set clear rules for visitors and stuck to them. The phone still lit up with calls she didn't answer. One afternoon she sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, the winter sun pale but steady on her face. The quiet wasn't empty now. It was hers, chosen. No footsteps upstairs, no whispered conversations she wasn't meant to hear. Just the rustle of dry leaves and the occasional hum of a car on the road beyond. For the first time in years she wasn't caring for someone who resented her for it. She wasn't stretching herself thin for gratitude that never came. The absence felt like peace. She was rinsing her mug in the kitchen sink when her phone buzzed on the counter. A message preview glowed on the screen. Beatrice, we're family and family sticks together. Don't forget that. Maybe the past could be fixed, but only if the truth was embraced. Lillian stared at the text for a long time before answering. We can meet. 1 hour. Public place. She hit send before doubt could nudge her into silence. 2 days later, she was at a small cafe near the edge of town, the kind of place where the tables were crowded with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh bread clung to the air. The rain had passed that morning, leaving the windows beaded with droplets. She chose a table by the glass, where the winter light caught the steam rising from her coffee. Beatrice arrived 10 minutes late, wrapped in a camel-colored coat, hair pulled into a low knot. She looked polished, but there was a tightness in her movements, like someone rehearsing casual. Thanks for coming, Beatrice said, sliding into the chair across from her. Lillian nodded but didn't smile. You wanted to talk. Beatrice's fingers curled around the edge of the table. I owe you an apology. She said it quickly, like pulling off a bandage. I didn't realize how far I'd taken things. I got used to leaning on you, and I crossed lines I shouldn't have. The words were neat, measured, too smooth. Lillian studied her daughter's face, searching for the cracks, the hesitation, the flicker of discomfort that would tell her this was more than just performance. She found a trace of both, but it was faint. This isn't about the apology, Lillian said. It's about whether you actually understand the damage you've done. To the trust, to our relationship, to me. Beatrice looked away, out toward the wet street where cars passed in slow bursts. I thought I was managing things the best way I knew. I didn't think you'd see it as manipulation. Lillian finished, because that's exactly what it was. A muscle in Beatrice's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. You have to understand, Lillian went on, her voice steady. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about acknowledgement. If we ever have a chance of starting over, you need to know exactly what you took from me, and I'm not talking about money. Beatrice's gaze returned to her, and for the first time there was something unguarded there. Something that looked like the beginnings of comprehension. I thought if I could just keep things comfortable, we'd be okay, that maybe you needed me to take the lead. Lillian shook her head. You were never leading. You were taking, and I let you, because I thought that was love. The silence between them was heavier now, but not hostile. Beatrice's shoulders lowered slightly, the tension loosening. So where do we go from here? We try, Lillian said simply, but on new terms. You're responsible for yourself. I'm responsible for myself. And we talk before we assume the other will carry the weight. Beatrice gave a small nod. Okay. They finished their coffees with small talk, weather, work, things that didn't matter but kept the air from closing in again. When they left the cafe, the air was sharp with the smell of wet pavement. At the curb, Beatrice hesitated. I'll call you, she said. You can, Lillian replied, but don't say things you don't mean. Beatrice gave a tight smile, then turned toward her car. The distance between them was still there, visible, almost physical, but at least now it was acknowledged. When Lillian returned home, the house greeted her with its familiar quiet. She set her keys on the table and noticed a small cardboard package propped against the doorframe. The postmark smudged, but legible. No return address, just her name in a careful looping script she hadn't seen in years. She carried it to the kitchen, slicing through the tape with a paring knife. Inside was a single envelope, the paper thick and cream-colored. On the front, in handwriting she recognized instantly, was one word, Lillian. She turned it over, and the name in the corner made her breath catch. Ethan. I wasn't just moving on, I was moving forward. The letter from Ethan sat unopened on the desk for 3 days. Lillian walked past it every morning, her fingers itching to break the seal, but she refused to let curiosity dictate the rhythm of her new life. There had been too many years of reacting to someone else's needs, someone else's emergencies. This time she set the pace. Her mornings now began with sunlight through clean windows, not the creak of footsteps on the stairs. She made breakfast for one, read the paper without interruption, and lingered over her coffee until it was lukewarm. The quiet wasn't absence anymore, it was a presence all its own. A week after the cafe meeting, Beatrice called. This time her voice didn't have the defensive edge Lillian had grown used to. They spoke for 15 minutes about work, about the weather, about nothing dangerous, no demands, no accusations. It wasn't trust yet, but it was a step. Lillian didn't linger on it. She had things to do. Rachel had connected her with a community center in need of volunteers for their financial literacy program. At first Lillian had hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted to talk about money with anyone for a while, but within an hour of sitting in that bright drafty hall with a handful of single parents and retirees, she felt something click into place. Here her experience wasn't something to be exploited, it was a tool she could hand to someone else. By the 3rd week she was spending most mornings there, helping people untangle budgets, spot predatory clauses in contracts, and avoid the traps she'd lived through. Each time someone left her table with their shoulders lighter, she felt the same quiet satisfaction. I'm useful on my own terms. Her circle widened. Rachel remained her anchor, but now there was also Marianne from the center, who baked bread on Fridays, and Tom, a widower who swore by his mother's recipe for chili and dropped off a container every other Sunday. They filled her days with conversation and small acts of kindness that never came with strings attached. The house, too, began to change. She repainted the front door a deep green, moved the heavy dining table into storage, and replaced it with a lighter round one that fit her kitchen perfectly. The upstairs bedroom she'd avoided for years became her study, sunlit and lined with bookshelves. One crisp afternoon, she sat in the small garden out back, pruning the hydrangeas she'd neglected last summer. A cup of tea cooled on the stone ledge beside her. For the first time in decades, she wasn't waiting for the next crisis, the next call, the next compromise. It struck her then, she no longer needed anyone's permission to feel whole. Not Beatrice's, not anyone. She was gathering the last of the clippings into a basket when the phone rang inside. Wiping her hands on her jeans, She stepped into the kitchen and glanced at the caller ID. "Grace," she answered on the second ring. "Hello." Grace's voice was warm, but held an undercurrent of something unspoken. "Lillian, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. There's someone who wants to meet with you," Grace said slowly, as if measuring each word. Lillian frowned. A pause, then, "I'll explain when I see you, but you should know, it's about family, and it's important." Her gaze drifted to the desk in the next room, where Ethan's unopened letter still waited. Grace's voice lowered. "You've been named in an inheritance, Lily, and it changes everything." The page was blank, but it was mine to write. The inheritance was more than Lillian had imagined, not a mansion or a fortune in cash, but a portfolio of assets, scattered across places she'd only seen in travel magazines. A small flat in Lisbon, shares in a vineyard in South Africa, enough liquid funds to allow her to breathe without glancing at a balance every time she wanted to live a little. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to ask, "Can I afford this?" She only had to ask, "Do I want this?" And the answer was yes. 2 months later, she stood on the cobbled streets of Porto, the air rich with the smell of fresh bread and river salt. The narrow buildings leaned toward each other like conspirators, their tiled facades glinting under a shy sun. She wandered without a map, tasting pastries from bakeries that spoke no English, letting her feet decide her direction. At night, in the quiet of her flat, she began to write, not letters or ledgers but stories. At first they were small vignettes about the places she saw, the people who crossed her path. Then they grew into something larger. A blog about rebuilding a life from the inside out. She wrote about the court battle, about walking away from toxic dependence, about standing in her own home and realizing it was hers in every sense. The blog found its audience faster than she expected. Women wrote to her from across the world, some trapped in financial binds, some already free but still carrying invisible chains. She answered every message, each one a reminder that her story was more than survival. It was a blueprint. Zach, an old friend from the community center, was the first to say it out loud. "You should start something bigger. A fund. A charity." The idea caught like a spark on dry grass. By the end of summer she had registered a nonprofit, dedicated to helping women reclaim financial independence, offering legal advice, budgeting skills, and when possible, emergency grants. She named it Second Light, after the way morning sun looks when it filters through a storm that's finally passed. Her days became a rhythm of movement, flying to oversee the vineyard's new harvest, returning to the Lisbon flat to write, then traveling again to meet with potential donors. In Cape Town she stood barefoot on warm sand watching penguins waddle along the shoreline. In Kyoto she knelt in a quiet temple garden, the air thick with the scent of cedar. In Florence, she learned to make pasta from a woman whose hands had shaped dough for 70 years. Everywhere she went, she carried herself differently. Not like someone fleeing, but like someone arriving. Occasionally Beatrice called. The conversations were polite, almost cautious, but no longer laced with accusation or manipulation. Lillian didn't expect closeness to grow from them, but she welcomed the civility. It was enough. One autumn afternoon, she returned to the vineyard for the harvest festival. Rows of vines stretched under a wide blue sky, the air alive with the scent of crushed grapes and the sound of laughter. A group of local women she'd hired for seasonal work presented her with a bouquet of wildflowers and a hand-painted sign, "Obrigado, Lillian." That night she sat on the balcony with a glass of the vineyard's first bottled vintage and thought about the woman she had been a year ago, treading water in a house that didn't feel like hers, afraid to take a single step that might upset someone else's comfort. That woman was still a part of her, but she was no longer the one holding the pen. Her passport was thick with stamps now, her calendar filled with meetings she wanted to attend, places she wanted to see. The weight she carried was no longer obligation, it was possibility. A week later she found herself in the Andes, hiking a trail that zigzagged up the mountainside. The air was thin, the path uneven, but each step felt lighter than the last. When she reached the summit, the world spread out before her, valleys carved by centuries, clouds drifting so close she could almost touch them. She stood there, wind tugging at her jacket, the sky wide open above her. For the first time she didn't wonder what came next. She knew. Lillian took a deep breath, looking out over the horizon, and smiled, not because the journey was over, but because it had only just begun. They gave me a plate. I built a feast for myself. The vineyard's great hall glowed with the soft amber of string lights, their reflection trembling in the rows of wine glasses set neatly along the long farmhouse table. The scent of rosemary roasted lamb drifted through the air, mingling with bursts of laughter that rose and fell like music. Outside, the sun was melting into the horizon, leaving the hills awash in gold. Lillian moved between the tables, a glass of her own vintage in hand, pausing to hug Marianne, to clap Tom on the shoulder, to kiss Rachel's cheek. Every seat was filled, not with the ghosts of people who had taken from her, but with those who had given something back, her chosen family. In the corner she spotted Ethan speaking with Claire. Years ago, the sight of them in the same room might have twisted her stomach. Tonight, it didn't even ripple the surface. They were simply people, parts of her past, who no longer held the pen to her story. She caught Ethan's eye briefly. He raised his glass in a quiet toast, a gesture neither apology nor intrusion. She nodded once, nothing more, and turned back to the sound of Marianne telling a story about the first harvest, hands flying animatedly. When everyone had eaten their fill, Lillian stood at the head of the table. The murmurs softened, the only sound the faint clink of cutlery being set down. "I've been thinking about what it means to arrive somewhere," she began. Her voice was steady, low enough that people leaned forward to catch each word. "For a long time, I thought arriving meant having the right people around me, the right home, the right everything. But I've learned that arrival is a state of mind. You can have all the right things and still feel lost, or have very little and feel completely at home." Rachel smiled at her from halfway down the table, eyes shining. "This," Lillian continued, gesturing to the room, "is home. Not because of the walls, not because of the vineyard, but because of the people who sit here tonight. People who stand on their own feet, but still reach out to steady someone else when they stumble." The table broke into warm applause, and she felt it not as praise but as confirmation. She had built this. She had chosen every brick. As the evening unfolded, music spilled from a small quartet in the corner, blending with the hum of conversation. Ethan approached her once, offering a brief handshake and a polite, "You've done well for yourself." Claire simply nodded as they passed each other near the dessert table. Neither encounter lingered, neither left a mark. They had no power here anymore. Later, she stepped outside to the terrace, where the air was cool and scented with crushed grapes. The moon hung low over the hills, casting silver along the rows of vines. From inside came the muffled echo of laughter and the clink of wine bottles being uncorked. She leaned on the railing, letting the quiet settle. Her life no longer revolved around fixing what was broken. It was about building what was whole. She thought of the girl she had been at 20, dreaming of a life where she could stand in her own name. She thought of the woman who had nearly lost herself trying to hold together a family that treated her love as a bottomless well. Now, she was neither. She was something more. Marianne stepped out with 2 glasses of wine, handing her one, to Freedom. Lillian took it, holding it up so the moonlight caught the deep red inside. "To choosing," she said. They clinked glasses, and for a moment, the world felt perfectly still. Inside, the music swelled again, calling her back. She drained the last sip of wine, and set the glass down on the stone ledge. The door to the hall opened, spilling golden light across her face. She straightened, smoothing her dress, and stepped forward, not into the party, but into whatever waited beyond it. Fade to black, as Lillian walks down the terrace steps, the sound of celebration behind her, the night opening wide ahead, hers to claim, hers to fill, hers to live.